Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Words episode. Is this 78 or 79?
78.
78. It is terrifyingly early in the morning. Danny had to wake up even earlier than I am. So, Danny, good morning. It is Thursday morning. And
Thursday morning.
This is our this is how we introduce ourselves every time because of Nancy Pelosi's famous Sunday morning press where she said good morning Sunday morning, like she had to remember what day it was. So we like to play with that. Anywho, we're up frightfully early, but for no better reason that I can think of. Former presidential candidate, many time Congresswoman, and I read her Wikipedia this morning, which informed me of tons of things about her that I didn't actually know, right? But I read it and I was like, how could anyone actually argue with this? Like the way history has played out, she's been just about right about pretty much everything. And the things, the accusations that they throw at her at this point are like, you know, badges of honor. So after many years after our original meeting and for the first time with Danny, Cynthia McKinney, we are so happy to have you. Welcome back. It's nice to see you. Good evening to you.
That's right. It's nighttime here. And thank you very much for accommodating my crazy time zone issues. But I'm happy to be back with you guys.
So when we spoke, it was, I think, in 2017 when you were on my old show Off Planet Radio with Randy Moggins, and we had a great show. But, you know, I think we thought we were at peak insanity then. Like it didn't, like, I think like peak insanity seemed like, I think you were agreeing with Steve Bannon about one thing, right? Like the world must have come to some sort of an end because you were not only agreeing with him, but willing to say so and whatnot, right? But I mean, I don't think either one of us could have imagined the things that have happened in the 6 years of space in between. I took a look at the Wikipedia for you this morning, which
no, I'm sorry about that. I do not allow my students to use Wikipedia as a source.
and rightfully so. Like the only reason I ever use Wikipedia is I have a series that I do with someone else where we do a lot of like synchromysticism, right? Like a lot of sort of kind of create your own adventure out of the things that the reality says is true and the things it says are not true. And I've found that there's like a code to Wikipedia that if you understand how to weave through it, it actually yields some fascinatingly interesting information. Whether it's true or not, it's certainly entertaining. But when I looked at yours, I did learn things about you that I didn't know. And I was actually surprised that other than like the, you know, necessary references to anti-Semitism and all that nonsense, it actually paints a picture of a glowing person who's been right on almost every issue. And the best they could really come up with was to call you a politician, an academic, and a conspiracy theorist. So I was like, okay. But I learned a lot of things about you that I don't know that sounded right. You know, I'm not saying that they were right because they were on Wikipedia. And it kind of goes along with my experience of you. When I say that, I don't mean the conversation we had, though I really enjoyed it and it was well received by everyone I know, whether they agree with my positions about the world or not. Every person I have ever brought you up to in person, every human I've ever talked to, whether they are Republican, Democrat, don't believe in the system at all, religious, non-religious, mostly a nice person, mostly an asshole, whatever, they all like you. They all like you and they're like, oh yeah, like that, like, you know, I don't disagree with her about everything, but she seems like a reasonable person. I'd vote for her or whatever it is. And I guess when that's the case, the only endpoint to that is to be run out of Washington, D.C. and find your future only in Bangladesh. I guess that is right. Of our democracy, which has become our favorite buzzword for, you know, like people you definitely shouldn't believe or trust. So with that in mind, just, you know, can you kind of like, where are you at with things? Like what on earth is going on here? And, and, you know, my guess is that your position on like who you are hasn't changed in the 6 years since I've spoken to you. but I sense that there might be less belief in the system now than there was 6 years ago. So can you kind of tell us what this has been like for you, and sort of like where you're at with things now, and then we'll get into individual sort of topics and directions of flow and whatnot. But I would love to hear an update from you on your relationship with this reality.
Okay, I really like the way you put things, because basically you've encapsulated. I mean, it's like, I was looking at The Matrix the other night, sort of revisiting sort of red pill, blue pill worlds. And then I never saw Matrix 3, so I bought Matrix 3 and Matrix 4. And I looked at Matrix 3, which kind of leads us into Matrix 4, which is the resurrection, and then I think it's revolution. So where we are in the United States is a very interesting issue or topic of conversation, because I just had a conversation with my students about where we are in the United States as opposed to where they are in Bangladesh. And once you sort of understand, okay, we're on the other side of the planet and people's ideas are really different over here and their experiences are really different. And so you have to take into consideration the experiences that they have had in order to understand the differences. And those differences are not bad. They're just different. And so, like, for example, if you're talking about political systems, which I talk a lot about. So you're talking about political systems, and all we in the United States know is what the United States has been for the last 200 years. Over here, I'm dealing with a civilization that's thousands of years old in the first place. And then there's the phenomenon of that civilization having been suppressed or oppressed for hundreds of years through colonialism. And that creates a kind of mentality or phenomenon that one has to acknowledge and then deal with before one could actually consider oneself free. And then you look at a country like Bangladesh that was born twice, because it was born in 47 at the end of colonialism, but then it was also born again when East Pakistan separated from West Pakistan, and East Pakistan became Bangladesh. That was 1971. And in that brief period of time, they've gone through dictatorship, military rule, junta, authoritarianism, democracy. They've had like a whole lot of experiences that we just haven't had. And so what I was explaining to my students today was that in many ways, their historical knowledge about the difference in political systems and what kind of political system would best serve them, as opposed to the kind of political system that we have had, and now that we're looking for what political system can best serve us now in the 21st century, what we can characterize our political system as is a kakistocracy. Because for all of the experiences that we've had, where we've been sitting on top of the world, having the founding fathers in a revered kind of way, and then having sort of these icons of the past in a revered way. But the bottom line is that we now have people who really should not be considered our political leaders for the United States. We ought to be able to do better than what we've got. And moreover, when you fail to hold those people who have created the kakistocracy, when you fail to hold them accountable, then that paves the way for psychopaths to take over. And so now we've got the psychopathocracy of Greg Caton. He's the one that created the term. And we've truly got a psychopathocracy. So the United States has slid from sort of the vaulted heights that it used to be to it's nothing more than a psychopathocracy. How could we fall so quickly so far? You talk about this alternate world. We do have to begin to make some kind of sense out of what has happened so that we can pick ourselves back up and try and figure out how we're going to organize this governance so that people are not dispossessed of everything they have. Because right now, I think the negative indices are off the roof for the United States. And if you listen to what James Wolfenson said before a group of Stanford University MBA students, basically what he said is that the future for the West is deindustrialization, so that the 80-20 world that he grew up in will become the 35-65 world, where 35% of global GDP will be produced by the golden billion that Putin talks about, the Western European, the Western world, the world that we are so accustomed to. Maybe we'd better start trying to get accustomed to a different way of living. So there's a lot of things that go through my head, but this is just like what I was just literally talking about today with my students.
Cynthia, do you think that the American experiment was authentic and well-intentioned from the get-go, or was this baked in to the founding with like a longer, more nefarious game in their sights?
That's an interesting question, because in some respects you could say, yeah, this really was baked into the game. However, I had never thought about that until you pointed out, because quite frankly, you know, it's easy to buy into the lore and the narrative and to look at it more critically, as you are now suggesting that people do, is something that we just don't do, and I haven't done before. So I'm glad that you're telling me, yeah, let's take a look back 200 years. Let's stroll through this park and see what the markers were even back then. And you know what? There were some markers, like who actually could vote and who was left out. So that, you know, yeah, there were some markers. And so if you think about what Thomas Piketty has said about capitalism and the march of capitalism, is that the wealthy will become smaller and smaller in number, and the poorer will become larger and larger in number. And this is a process that has to be stopped, because it's not within sort of the baked in, it's not baked into the logic of the system that we have, which progressed quite naturally from capitalism to neoliberalism, and is into dispossession big time now.
So I like that you, I've certainly heard, I don't know that I've ever used the term kakistocracy before, but I've certainly heard other people talk about it. And that's exactly, I think, so to me in my head, our overlords are never going to say kakistocracy, but when they say our democracy, like you could just swap those two, because it seems like
that's right.
The leaders, the people that they think are acceptable leaders of quote our democracy are all of the people that would fit the definition of kakistocracy, and then in the more advanced stages, psychopathocracy, which is also a great term. So I know that you told me last time we talked that your son is an anarchist, right? I remember we talked about this. I'm assuming that he hasn't moved from that position, because generally once people arrive on that side of the fence, they don't go back in, right?
Yes, that's right.
I myself as well am, which I was then. Like your sort of way that you deal with people who are not in that same state of mind as you changes over time. You become more mature. You realize, okay, you can work with people who still believe in government, and you become sort of more soft and reasonable in terms of the way you're willing to deal with people. In the beginning, it's kind of like the first day you become a 9/11 truther or something, where everybody who doesn't agree with that is, an asleep idiot or whatever it is, right? But do we have to really wonder at this point? I mean, I don't wonder, but if democracy and the idea of democracy itself was one of the original mind control programs, like within government, right? Because, it's one, I had a friend that I used to go to parties with, to raves with, who was from Iran, right? And she told me like the dictatorship in the United States is so much more insidious than the dictatorship that she escaped in Iran, because everyone in Iran knew they were under dictatorship. And here people running around thinking that because they can post, naked pictures of themselves on the internet, or have 43 different flavors of bagel or whatever it is, that they live in freedom, right? But that, really it's this, this delusion of choice. It's not even an illusion of choice. It's a delusion of choice. When you look at what we have with the amount of information we've had access to, and the increase in that, even since you left government, right? The world is in like there's no, if we are to believe that information works the way we've been told, and that like there's primary source documents and original research, and then there's commentary on that and this, that, the other thing, right? If it is the way we've been told, then there's almost nothing you can't find access to anymore. But that doesn't seem to have moved us forward. It seems to have slid us back into the kind of scenario that was hundreds or thousands of years ago, where like there was a class of people that could look at some documents, and now we have skiffs for the documents that the public aren't allowed to, and they can go in there, but they can't take it out, right? And so, but in terms of like even the amount of available information, like none of the people whose names we know shouldn't be in jail. They should all be in jail, right? Even the ones that we think are like, say a few things that we like, or they're fighting the good fight on one issue or the other, like they all have something else going on that we should really question. I mean, what I was taken aback at when I was reading the Wikipedia page this morning, and it was crazy to me that they would say this in Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is supposed to make you look crazy. And instead, Wikipedia looks like you're maybe the first person that ever went to Washington with the idea in mind that we should hold people accountable for their actual behavior, right? I read a quote in there about what you said to Michael Chertoff about the nursing homes in Katrina, right? That if the owners of the nursing home were being held liable for the deaths of the people, shouldn't he be held too? And over and over and over in this Wikipedia page, this was what they were reporting about you. Is we know we've all seen you on the floor with the house with Donald Rumsfeld, right? That's probably your most famous video clip. But in case after case after case after case, that's what you're doing. And then this is evidence that you are somehow an anti-Semite, a conspiracy theorist, and a crazy person, right? And so, I mean, even within that, like I would say, tell me if I'm wrong about this, right? But during the period of time you were in governance, there was like a few other people that seemed to be reasonable, right? Dennis Kucinich, Ron Paul, like a few others here and there. then, you know, and like even within them, sometimes we see them like doing a thing that is like right now we're watching Dennis Kucinich do a thing that feels really uncomfortable to watch, right?
Yeah.
Not holding someone responsible for their behavior or where they're wrong. And it seems to me that that was your biggest problem, is you're the annoying little kid in the 3rd grade class who is like,
That's
but
right.
teacher, what about this? Which is like Danny and I
Mhm.
are in the same class, we're sitting in the same corner with you, right?
Mhm.
And isn't that the point? Like, to me, if there's any truth to quote unquote democracy, right? Which you know, the farther I get into this, like I'm like, I don't know if this is a good idea, and it's not because I think people shouldn't have a say, but I don't think that's actually what the people who came up with democracy meant when they said that, right? That's you're there to ask the annoying questions, and you did, right? And so, you know, do you think maybe, I would love to know what your students said when they're trying to decide, how do they feel about democracy? Do they see that as like some light on the hill in front of them that they're working towards? Or is their theory about that, no, we tried that and that didn't really work any better than the junta or the dictatorship, because essentially it was like the same thing, but we all walked around thinking it wasn't?
Well, it's amazing that you asked me about my students, because my students, actually, this is when I realized that I was on the other side of the planet, because my students were telling me, well, we had a dictator and he was good for us. He was good for Bangladesh. So then I have to wrap my head around, I have to unwrap my head around everything that I've been told or learned about dictatorships being bad, because here my students were telling me that they had a dictator and their dictatorship was good for their country, and they had a junta. And they were also telling me that they didn't mind going back to military rule because at least there was order. It was orderliness within the military rule. So I'm having to wrap my head around all of this because it's completely new to me. And, you know, I'm retirement age and I'm just now learning this. So imagine what a different world it is when these two come together and try to make sense out of things, because you're coming from two completely different experiences. So today's lesson that we talked about in class was separation of powers, checks and balances, and what happens when you don't have checks and balances and you've got a government that's fusion of power. So we were talking about all of these things, which basically relate to what you're talking about. And then let me add one additional problem that I am concerned about, really, really concerned about. And that is the students using artificial intelligence. So now what they want, what I am trying to tell them, I'm trying to wean them off Wikipedia. And then now they have started to use artificial intelligence. So I now have to pose the kinds of questions that artificial intelligence can't answer for them. And if artificial intelligence does answer for them, then I know they used artificial intelligence and they're going to get a 0 on that assignment. So I'm doing things to try and discourage that. Why? Because I actually looked at some things on so-called artificial chat GPT. And I did chat GPT, I did Bard, I did some whose name I didn't know. And so the thing about artificial intelligence is just like computers, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So now if the entire internet is being censored, which we know it is, stuff is disappearing all the time, even if it appears, it'll only appear for a few hours and then it's gone. So now artificial intelligence is only capturing the things that are allowed to be and persist on the internet. So there's a whole body of knowledge that is being left out of what my students are learning as they use, or mislearning, I should say, as they use artificial intelligence. So now, as a teacher, I have to know what I have to know what is, and I also have to know what ain't. Because if I don't know what ain't, then my students are going to be misled, mistaught, miseducated about where they are in the world and what their values as leaders for today and tomorrow need to be. So artificial intelligence is a real challenge, and is a real problem, because many, you can't be an expert at everything. And so then you've got to really broaden yourself, so that before you even ask the question of your students, you got to know all of the answers and the misanswers, so that you can mark them wrong when they give you a Chat GPT answer. That's one thing. So now with the separation of powers and checks and balances, I give them that Rumsfeld clip, and I say, now, this is what happens when you have strong checks and balances. I was in the legislative branch, and I was holding to account the executive branch, because the legislative branch is the one that sets the policy. And you guys over there in the executive branch are just supposed to carry it out. And I was trying to find out how well they carried out the policies that were set by the Congress. Well, now I found a wonderful, beautiful video that was actually made by some Australians that talked about what kind of world would we live in, or what kind of country would we live in if we didn't have checks and balances. And guess what? That video so accurately depicts where we are in the United States right now. We don't have checks and balances. Some people were able to figure out, with all of the, if you put it on I was drawing out, US is a federal state, Bangladesh is a unitary state. What does that mean? And then I was drawing it all out and putting it on the board and talking about the Constitution as a wall that creates the separation of powers and all of that. And it's really beautiful. Just like our Constitution is really beautiful. But then our reality is more and more distant from the beautiful words on the paper. And that's their experience as well, or that's what I say, I should say, that's the experience here. And I have generalized that if you just take a brief survey around the world, probably all republics degenerate to kakistocracies. That's what it looks like. Because there's been a proliferation of kakistocracies around the world. So this idea, maybe it was baked in to start with. I don't know. So anyway, so then I told my students, okay, so now there's an answer. And the answer to eliminating the kakistocracy, first of all, or the psychopathocracy, first of all, you have to understand how we failed, how we went wrong. So you get that. And then you say, okay, let's also test the system so you do that with civil society. So I'm trying to show them these concepts about political activities and have them to hold the key concept in their hand and just twist it around and look at it and study it. So you start out with civil society, Then you progress to the next, you become an interest group. So you're lobbying those people who are supposedly your representatives. And then you get responses of those in power is direct violence. Because there have been several protests down here in Bangladesh, and the government response was direct violence against the students. But that's no different than what has happened in the United States. It's direct violence. And so if this is the government response, no matter where you are or what kind of government you have, then it's a problem with the government, right? It's a government problem. And so we have that. And then the next step, when everything else fails, then I gave them John F. Kennedy's quote that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. So you enter into this revolutionary stage when everything else has failed. Every attempt at making positive change has failed. And I think that's where a growing segment of the US population is now realizing that nothing short of a real revolution, the US Revolution 0.2 or 2.0 or whatever, there's nothing else that's going to work.
Wow, you said a lot of stuff there. There's like a lot of paths I could go down. I do want to point out this, just real briefly, this interesting sort of analogy that happened in my mind while you were talking, and then I want to take the opportunity of the JFK quote to lead us into a conversation about RFK Jr. and Israel and whatever the fuck this is that we're looking at going on here. But when you were talking, at first I didn't understand where you were going with Chat GPT and checks and balances and all of this kind of stuff, but I don't know if you saw the recent shit show on the floor of Congress with Matt Taibbi arguing with Stacey Plaskett and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all of that kind of stuff. But it was very clear, not only that they were crazy and paid tools of an establishment, that all that stuff, but also that they didn't even understand that the things that they were suggesting be done to Matt Taibbi would break the law that they're sent, the Constitution that they're sent there to enforce. They seemingly don't maybe they don't understand the amendments to the Constitution. They've never read it. And it's kind of like what you're talking about with Chat GPT. It's sort of a colonization of the mind that removes the ability for checks and balances in the same way that like whatever that is that goes on there when someone gets to Washington is a colonization of their mind, to the point that like their interpretation of what they think they're there to do doesn't represent the reality externally at all. Right. So that was a great analogy.
Well, hold on. Can I ask something about that, Cynthia, from your experience? Is that just incompetence, ignorance, stupidity, or are they malevolent? Like, is there evil intent?
I think in many instances, you have good people who are trying to solve problems locally. And the natural progression would be for them, well, I can't beg this elected official to do anything to solve the problem, so I'm going to replace that elected official. But what I've seen is that people get trapped and people make mistakes. And the system is populated by evil. So say the elected official, member of Congress, gets elected, goes to Washington, D.C., and leaves the family back home. the elected official gets lonely, and there's a ready answer that's provided by malevolent forces. And then that elected official who had noble aims and goals becomes a part of the corrupt system. And I've seen that happen too many times. The only reason I think I didn't fall into that trap was because I had my dad who was telling me, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that. And I've spent 4 years in the Georgia legislature with him. And this was a time when you had Operation Frühmenschen. I don't know if you remember that, but Operation Frühmenschen was when the FBI was, you were getting all these Black elected officials, you know, these pesky Black people decided they were going to run for office. And they actually had the
How do you spell
potential.
Frühmenschen? I just want to look it up. Well, I've never heard of that. How do you spell Frühmenschen?
Oh, okay. And they had the potential to actually change policies. And so change the status quo. And so then you had the FBI do this operation against Black elected officials. So Black elected officials all over the country were being arrested on corruption charges. And it's not that they weren't corrupt, because in many instances, well, it's almost like the FBI now with the terrorists, right? The FBI is actually setting up terrorist opportunities and luring people in by paying them or whatever, you know, maybe they're here illegally. And so then, you know, well, you come here and we'll give you a green card or something. And then the next thing, you know, that individual is getting busted as a terrorist, you know, that sort of thing. And so Black elected officials, people I knew, people that were like family friends, were getting busted left and right all over. And it was this FBI thing. So my dad would school them, and he would tell them, you can't do this. You can't do what your white counterparts are doing. You just can't do it. And they would try to do it, and then they would get caught. And so you had this environment that was meant to trap you, and it happened. So there was malevolence in the system, and that malevolence was like an infectious disease. And even if you were inadvertent in your exposure, you still got trapped.
So that process that you described is also known as brownstoning, right? Have you heard term for it?
No, I've never heard it.
Right, brownstoning being the idea, because I think it started initially like during some sort of mafia period in New York, where somebody who needed compromising would be either slipped a Mickey or something like that, presented with a girl or a boy or whatever their thing was, that looked over 18 but was likely under 18, or in some cases maybe they were over 18 but this person was married and this was a gay encounter that they were having. Right, they were presented with that, and that person would take them back to a home, generally a brownstone in New York, that was wired, and then they'd be on tape, and then it's like right, it said that brownstoning is like the street term for what you described. Can you tell me real fast how you spell Frühmenschen? I can't find anything at all on the internet the way that I'm trying to spell it. Do you know how it's spelled?
Okay, did you spell it F-R-U-E maybe M-E-N-S?
Okay.
C-H-E-N or something like that. I have to look at. Let me write it and see here.
Oh, I got it. So, it's German operation. Okay, yep, got it. Okay, now I see it. It's also known as Okay, wait a second. Now okay, but it's telling me, it's giving me something completely different, but I understand what's going on here now, and I understand how to look for it. So, okay. It's trying to turn that into Operation Frantic, which is about something else. But now
I see.
Now I understand what path to go down, that it's a German word. So I'll look for it.
Yeah.
Later. I've never heard of it. So yeah, I mean that is pretty. That's been at a certain point that became my assumption, was just that there's very few people who've been able to evade that scenario.
Right.
You may be being the only one who was able to evade it, but didn't have some other serious, I don't want to say necessarily shortcoming, right? But like maybe you look,
you can say shortcoming.
Maybe you look at someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who seems to, in a lot of ways, be very honest and be willing to take unpopular stands, but has almost this religious obsession with militarism. Even though she is not for regime change wars, she loves drones. She really has a deep-seated belief in ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of this kind of stuff. And if you look into her history, she comes from the kind of religious sort of cult-like background that makes there's an easy path into controlling her in one way or the other. So it's like presented this like, okay, like she'll stand with you against regime change wars, but she's all for the drone bombing in Yemen and Somalia, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there's always something that if you can't compromise their integrity, they have some either deep-seated belief or some sort of childhood trauma that allows them to be led around in this way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so to me, like one of the things that most people don't know about you, like most people, when they first hear of Cynthia McKinney, they've never heard of you. Like my girlfriend here had never heard of you. When I described you to her, she's like, that sounds wonderful. Why did I never hear of her, right? Or if they do know you, they know you from like the clip with Donald Rumsfeld and you being feisty about 9/11 and a few other things like that. But probably the most important, you've done so many important things, but one of the most important things that you have done, and you have been much more clear about this than almost anyone other than maybe James Trafficant, who also had some of the other shortcomings that challenging for him, that you spoke of the unholy alliance between Israel, AIPAC, the government, how the Congress, the signing, the pledge of loyalty to Israel and all this kind of stuff that you refused to do. And even with all the other ways that you challenged the system, I think I've heard you say that was really the reason that you got run out of town. And now we're in this very uncomfortable political situation where the solution that a lot of people have come to is someone like RFK Jr., who is so good on certain topics. If you only look a little bit, a few inches deep, if you actually even dig into the topics he's supposedly good on, there's some reasons to be concerned. But, like, okay, like, I understand why the majority of people who are not deep seekers would be intrigued by that. And then he has this position that seems to have been newly formed or recently evolved on Israel that is so delusional that the only person I could think to ask who we might be able to get an informed answer on what the hell is really going on here would be you. So I would like to know what this looks like from the position you're sitting in. Like, what is happening? Is this just symbolic of how deeply incestuous this relationship is, and either this person really believes this or it's not hard for him to believe it? Or are we looking at a level of control and threat that has been inserted into his reality that like is so pervasive in that class of people who know what this is about, that like nobody's even willing to question it at all? Like what are we actually looking at here?
Well, that's a hard one.
Are you serious? Cynthia, we can't hear you if you're... That is impossible.
They're totally possible.
Okay, everybody. So just so you know, like she's not, Cynthia is not with us any longer. Hopefully she'll be able to come back.
Whoa. There's a consistency when we have a guest and ask the hard questions.
Okay, so we just lost you for almost a minute there. As soon as you were about to answer, it cut out. Like it didn't cut out anywhere else in the conversation. When I asked you what we were looking at here with Israel, Like, it's almost like there is some frequency boundary to reality that when it gets approached, that everything goes haywire. Could you repeat what you said, please, Cynthia?
Well, yeah, I really didn't pay that much attention to RFK Jr.'s campaign until recently. And unfortunately, it was in the midst of this storm that I started attention. And the reason I started paying attention was because, well, it would be very nice to have not Biden. It would be very nice. And so I said, okay, well, somebody else actually had contacted me and said, I think we ought to pitch this. So I said, okay, well, let's write up something. So I'm in the process of writing something up that would be policy positions, right? And then this matter came up, and the person who originally contacted me just sort of threw his hands up and said, well, maybe we need to leave this alone, And so then, of course, with me being so super busy, I come back to him a couple of days ago and said, what's going on with this? Because otherwise I've got to set some time aside to do some writing. And he said, yeah, I think we need to do this now that has died down. In the meantime, though, I don't know if you're familiar with Kevin Barrett. He's a professor. Yes. Okay, so Kevin Barrett wrote something that was really interesting, kind of like a psychoanalysis of what we're watching here, because for RFK Jr. to be so grounded in some respects and so ungrounded in others, it's like, and Kevin Barrett suggested that this might be a coping mechanism for what we might be watching is a coping mechanism for someone who has been deeply, deeply hurt. And I would say that that's probably what's going on, that maybe even RFK Jr. hasn't put a peg on why he's having this, he's living in this netherworld. It's probably more like, with the Catholics, they believe in purgatory and they believe in limbo. So now I think purgatory is where you go to burn off your sins, and then limbo, purgatory is where it shows you how long ago it's been since I read about that. But and then purgatory is where you go, I think that's forever. And limbo is where you go to burn off your sins. Well, anyway, it's like maybe when it comes to US-Israel policy and RFK trying to think about what that would look like, he's in limbo. He's in limbo. And I just have to say that you can't be this good on other issues and this bad on this issue. So I don't know, I haven't really gone there to just say, well, does he really believe what he's saying? So there's something in me that says he can't believe what he's saying. But I don't know.
Why is he saying it? Is someone making him say it?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I could easily see that someone would be making him say it, because it's part of the campaign strategy. My candidacy is already second rail, so I need to stay away from the third rail. I would say that that's more likely scenario than anything else. And so, I have so much that's going on in my campaign. I have so many disbelievers. Let me just get through every other hurdle, and then I'll deal with that hurdle later. That could be a strategy, or it could be that he's just totally delusional.
So you're more gracious in in what you say. Tell me, this is kind of what I see, and you tell me if this sounds reasonable based on your understanding of the many layered operations that go on, because a lot of them have been running again. I've seen some of the craftiest operations ever run on you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this person. So when I did not see his candidacy coming, right? Like I pay attention to lots of different things, but I have to admit, I was kind of surprised when I heard he was running for president. But the moment that I heard he was running, I started for like probably 2 to 3 months. I listened to almost every interview I could find of hhim until it got to the point where they were all just repetitive. But in those early days when he was ironing out things to say and whatnot. But the one of the first interviews I heard of him was on this podcast. I think I forget what it's called. Was it called what was that podcast that I said? Was it called the All In podcast or something? I forget what it was called, but it has like David Sachs, who I think is one of his benefactors. And I can't remember the name. He's like an Indian guy who's kind of all of these people. There's 4 hosts, and he was on for like 2.5 hours with them. And these were all people that you and I would consider to be establishment +1. So establishment being they're establishment, but they have one thing that they're anti-establishment on that is like a passion project of theirs that makes them walk this line between sort of establishment and sub-establishment, right? And so each one of them was kind of having their turn back and forth with them. And as I listened to the way they were approaching him and to the way he was answering, I'm like, this guy is going to be the establishment candidate. They're going to put him through some kind of hell, but they need people to give people a reason to believe in the system again. They need to reignite a desire. And one of the things that everyone says, no matter what side you're on, is how out of touch and unreasonable the people in Washington are. And in RFK, you see someone who is willing to say, I don't know, right?
Yes.
Which we talked about before we started here, that if I bring anything up that you don't have anything you know about, right? Willing to say, I don't know. Willing to say, I'm willing to change my position on this if you're presented new evidence. Willing to consider, like, have a reasonable debate, conversation with someone who he disagrees with, and all of these things that that humanize him. He also has obviously this thing with his throat that so many Americans now struggle with different kinds of health conditions and whatever, everything about him. And then he's part of this family that is American royalty. And whether people say they believe in it or not, there's a lot of people who have this weird inner desire for like royalty, right? Like these people who are obsessed with like watching the processions in Britain and whatever. It's bizarre.
Right. Yeah.
So he hits a lot of those pegs, right? So I was like, oh, they're going to have to retire Joe Biden at some point. Right. And this would
I think we all see that coming.
Yes. And this would be a person that would feel like a win to so many people, because people on the left will appreciate his climate activism. People on the right or people outside of the regular political system will appreciate his stances on COVID. Right. And I think one of the things that we are going to see, if things play out the way I saw them then, but things are shifting all the time, is we're going to see him shift his position on nuclear from being anti-nuclear to being willing to consider nuclear, right? And so there's like all of these reasons that people will people who had stopped voting for lots of times, just like people who'd stopped voting before Trump came along, people who'd stopped voting might be willing to reinvest, right, in the system. That this is a good candidate. Right. So it will give people the belief that they've brought in that a grassroots campaign can win. Right. Then this weird thing happens with Israel. Right. And I didn't trust RFK from the beginning. And one of the clues to me to not trust someone is when we hear the term our democracy, or when there's this obsession with democracy, obsession.
Yes.
Always saying it. Right. But like, if you look back a few years with him, he proposed draconian things be done to people who didn't believe in climate change. So the same things he fought against in the COVID measures, he was for in climate measures, right? The person that doesn't believe in democracy as it's been presented to us, but if democracy is what I'm beginning to believe it is, then he's actually a perfect representative of democracy. And whether he really believes these things about Israel or not, like it looks to me like he probably was one of these people who was kind of neutral on the Israel-Palestine issue and knows it's wrong, but knows it's kind of like a shit show to get involved in, so would prefer to stay away. But because he's going to be the establishment candidate, they had to get the hooks in on him, and they surprised him with this. I think he really thought he was going to be able to go through most of the campaign without being confronted on this, because most of the other candidates are pro-Israel, and he was really just not say anything or whatever it is, right? He's not being anti-Israel, so he didn't think he was going to get stuck in this position. But I think there's a couple of things. All of this happened in the same time period that supposedly he applied for Secret Service protection and was denied it. Right. And my guess would be that the denial is also correlated to keeping this Israel, because we know that there's like a secret intelligence service aspect to that pressure, as well as just the public relations aspect, right? To keeping him under that. But to me, the overall idea that I think people that the control system would like to have sort of solidified is that, and I want to be careful with this term because I understand it's loaded, but I don't know a better term to use, that apartheid can be a part of democracy. Because he's always talking about we have to defend Israel because it's the only democracy in the Middle East, right? Democracy, democracy, democracy. We have to be, right? And all these excuses are made for the scenario in Palestine. Well, one of the things that people were saying, rightly or wrongly, during COVID was that there was a medical apartheid going on here, right? And so, like, if you can get a person who, like people believe in him because his position on COVID, but he holds this, whether it be true or untrue, unreasonable position on the Israel-Palestine issue, which unfortunately most people don't understand why that issue is so important. Because if you will buy into that nonsense on that, you will buy into almost anything, right? And so if you can get people to say, well, he's not perfect on Israel, but I like his position on COVID, so I'm going to vote for him anyway. They don't understand that they just basically signed their own, death slip there, because eventually some form of apartheid that is more than just class apartheid that we sort of live in here is going to become a factor here, whether it's COVID or whether it's climate lockdown or whatever it is. You're going to have a scenario where people who don't believe the same thing as the elite ruling class are going to be segregated. And that is an acceptable part of democracy if people vote for it. So like basically what he was saying is that because this is the scenario in Israel, but it's a democracy, like that's the decision that they've made as to how they handle their business. So we have to respect that. Like that would be what he would bring here. So he's not really an anti-establishment candidate, right? Because he believes in this overarching force of democratic governance, supposedly. And I'm sure your son has enlightened you to the fact that the word government means mind control. I'm sure you've had that conversation with him. And that democracy is really just mind control enforced by the masses who've been propagandized well enough.
Who've been propagandized.
So that the government doesn't have to.
That's right.
Sound about right about what we're looking at here?
That's right. Plus, let me just say that he had no business asking for Secret Service security in the first place. He should have gotten his own security. Is he going to rely on established institutions that have failed?
His family multiple times.
That's right.
His own family.
If anyone knows, that's right. It should be RFK Jr. who should know from his uncle with the failure of the Secret Service. The guy is standing there like this, and the car is driving off, and the guy is standing there raising his hand saying, what's going on? And he's being told, you can't get on your detail. So this was not just an accident. This was Secret Service actually failing to do its job by order, okay? And RFK was going to become the Democratic nominee as well. So, I mean, you know, the whole security thing, he should know that by now. So, I mean, if he hasn't figured that out,
Yeah.
then maybe he's not the candidate that we actually expect him to be. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you know, I hadn't thought about it, but is RFK Jr. Bernie? We've been there before. And we had Bernie 1.0, then we had Bernie 2.0.
And now I don't know. Now we just have, I don't know what this is.
I know.
I mean, did you see him basically telling Cornel West to sit down and not run because it's more important to defeat the evil fascist Trump than to have a candidate that actually has policies that anyone can believe? Like, he literally said that.
Wait a minute. No. You got to catch me up. What happened?
So he was on with Dana Bash this week. I'm telling you what I have read. I haven't watched the clip. Dana Bash. And he was asked about Cornel West. And of course, he said, my dear friend Cornel West, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But then he said, basically, and this is me summing it up, while I agree with him substantially, all those ideas are nice because all that really matters is defeating the evil fascist Donald Trump. And so everyone who believes in any form of leftism at all needs to get behind Joe Biden. Like, he literally said that. Like, he basically told him that he called his dear friend Cornel West a distraction. Right?
But you know what? That is like an important piece of evidence for why you would say he's going to be the establishment candidate. See, I'm totally unaware of all of this, but I mean,
that's what Bernie Sanders said. That's what Bernie Sanders, not what RFK said. RFK had said that he thinks. This is what Bernie Sanders said. And Bernie Sanders has a long history of friendship and working on things with Cornel West and whatever. So he literally sold his friend down the river in support of.
Well, you know, Bernie is not, well,
Bernie.
I mean, Bernie had shortcomings, but when he decided to throw his hat into the ring, and I thought it was a serious candidacy, I said, well, you know, and then he seemed to get better and better on the campaign trail. So, yeah, okay, I can go with Bernie. And then Bernie does a 180. I mean, what the heck? He endorses Hillary? I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, so Bernie, it was Bruce Dixon of Black Agenda Report that called it the very first thing. He said, Bernie is a sheepdog. He's just sheepdogging all of the, you know, sort of the lefty part of the Democratic Party and giving the Democratic Party some new life. Now, you know, I've run for office a lot of times, and I never made $1 million from a campaign. I was always broker after I ran, right?
Yeah.
And Bernie now is a millionaire and has multiple vacation homes, and you know, so there are appropriate rewards for going along and getting along. You know, there are the rewards, and so I'm sorry that. Well, I mean, that comment is par for the course for someone who is an insider. And Bernie, who started out as an outsider, is very much an insider now.
Cynthia, do you think there's any hope for saving America beyond revolution? Is there any hope for restoring checks and balances? Or, like, my first question to you, was that kind of bunk from the get-go?
Well, you know, for us to, we we need more people who are willing to join us and say, I'm going to resist. Now, the COVID lockdown craziness did open a few more eyes, but it's sort of like you can't get a darn movement going, and some of us have really tried, that actually brings people together. Because when people come in, they have the one issue that they're in on, but their minds are still out there. And I tell my students, Steve Biko, the late great anti-apartheid leader in South Africa, said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. And so we have people who are so deep down the rabbit hole of the blue pill that to even be able to engage them with a red pill is like what Morpheus says, your choice has already been made for you. And we only need critical mass, and that's only about 27%. And we could probably do, maybe we could do a whole lot with even less than 27% if we were able to strike in the critical points. But we need the skills, we need the courage, we need the organization, we need the mobilization. There are things that we need that I don't see happening. And that is why, like, I'm at this crossroad right now. I'm trying to figure out what's my future going to look like. I'm approaching, I think I'm going to work as long as I can work, because that interacting with these young people really, sort of wakes you up, and you got to be on point, because they'll bring up anything, and then you got to figure out, oh, well, let me figure that out. I never looked at it that way before. So this is really a good experience for me. It's a shame I wouldn't be allowed to teach in the US, but what I'm doing, I really like. My question for myself is, where am I going to end up? My family is still in the US, but is everybody in the US so down? It's so that leash that you were talking about, so they can be so misled. If it's not Russia, then it's China. And everybody is being told, you got to look here, look there. And people are actually looking there. And instead, they're not focused on the United States. Something that they can change, that they can impact. And, it's the yellow peril all over again, or it's those commie Russians, and I'm just disappointed at the lack of evidence-based discourse and the narrowness of the allowed discourse, that people haven't taken themselves outside of the box, or as Seymour Hersh would say, outside of the silo. So the people have been siloed, and they've accepted the silo. And that's what I just, let me go someplace where people are still willing to struggle, and that people still know how to think.
So I want to say something about what you just said, and then I think I have kind of a question of a little bit more of a metaphysical nature that I want to see if I can thread the needle on this and get what I'm going for here. So what you just said is really important, the siloing, right? Like this, so there's all these Maui fires going on, right? And there's this talk about talk about directed energy weapons. And the best directed energy weapon is our attention. and the way that
Yes.
they're leading us around. And it isn't just, there's this establishment narrative, and then they've also found that there's a good siloing tactic you can do with a counter narrative, where they've
Right.
created a scenario where you're not allowed to talk about certain things on YouTube. Right. And so people assume that those things are the things we should talk about. So then they have another silo called Rumble or called BitChute or called
Yes.
whatever, where all people do is talk about the thing that you've been told you're not allowed to talk about on YouTube. And then you have people on YouTube talking about the fact that they're not allowed to talk about the things that are now being talked about on the other place, which is a completely waste of time conversation. And there's a few topics that are never censored that are really actually quite important, and that require a little bit more effort. And in my opinion, at this point, it's been this way for a long time, but I've become more refined in my understanding of why I feel this way, that politics has been created as a distraction for the people by maybe said founding fathers, because the founding fathers were also Freemasons, and all the conspiracy theorists hate the Freemasons, but for some reason they like the founding fathers. Now, I don't hate Freemasons. I think, like every other group of people, there's good ones, there's bad ones, there's every shade in between. Right. But they seem to have a grasp on reality creation. And so if you're busy trying to build your own reality or trying to understand the elements you have to work with around you, and you need some peace and quiet and some space and time to do that, if you create a system where people get to argue with each other all day and they think that that's what freedom means, is that I'm free to say whatever I want to this person who I disagree with, and it will occupy the time and the mind space and the money and all that of the people who are squabbling about basically a circle or a plantation that was drawn for them to be in, while others are sitting outside of that. They don't care about that. They're focused on, you know, like there's so many advancements being made in the understanding of the world around us that are tantamount to what they've presented to us as magic or alchemy, but really it's understanding what you have to work with here. And none of the people who are arguing about RFK and Joe Biden and Donald Trump or whatever are thinking about that. And to the extent they ever think about it, they get the bullshit version. They get, you know, fucking dirty nuclear fission, not fusion. They get, you know, whatever it is, right? Kind of thing. Okay. So at this point, I think the only answer is to disengage. Because if people stop paying attention to the dog and pony show that's been presented to us, as enticing as it is, as much as it pulls on each one of us to like fight for what's right, stand up for the oppressed, like the people who are oppressing have no power if you pay no attention to them. And so disengagement on a level, you know, one of the things I always really liked, even though I'm not a political person at all anymore, I always loved the idea of a general strike, but not the part where you're in the street. The part where you're not going to work, not spending money, and not engaging in any of the system, just ignoring it, staying home and like play with your family and work on your garden or whatever it is. So I think disengagement is probably the most powerful tool, but that doesn't mean not paying attention. It just means disengaging. And like, you know, a lot of these people who want to fight for the rights of Ukrainians wouldn't fight for the right of someone being abused right next door to them. They would be like, oh, I'm not going to get involved. Right. So paying attention to what's around you instead of what's on the box, and stop participating financially and energetically in the system. Right.
That's right.
So that's where I'm at with that. But I want to ask, as you look back on your time in Washington, how you got there, what happened to you when you were there, where you are now, do you think that it's possible that all of this is really about something very, very different than what it's been presented as? That the things that are being, the rails that are being guarded are actually very, very different than the ones they want us to think they are. And while it's kind of like, you know, when someone makes an end run in football where there's a lot of chaos on this side of the field and someone's running around, right? And that maybe we're living in a very different kind of world than what we think, right? Maybe we live in a world that isn't governed by the same rules of time and space that we've been led to believe, that there are powerful locations in and around the earth that would mean a whole other understanding of reality for anybody who is aware of them. Coincidentally, those are always the areas where there seem to be political wars about it that seems kind of stupid and archaic, but no conversation about the fact of like what's under the ground there or what the paintings on the wall might actually mean in the caves and all of it.
Yeah.
It all seems to point to very high-end physics and very weird kind of, right? Have you ever seen, there's a TV show called The Man in the High Castle that is based on the Philip K. Dick book. You're familiar with Philip K. Dick, right? I think like, you know, you don't know who Philip K. Dick is? Oh, wow. He is an incredible writer, but if I had to wrap it up in a sentence to you, I would say that he was a science fiction writer who was probably the first person to recognize the experience that is now known as the targeted individual experience. And this was back in the 70s.
The man in what?
This particular one that I'm talking about is called The Man in the High Castle. And it's a book that's been made into a television series. It's on Prime. Okay. It's excellent. This television series is excellent. I highly recommend you watch it. Right.
Okay, I will.
It talks about what would have happened if World War II went a different way, and that the United States had been, instead of supposedly winning the war, half of the United States had been taken over by the Nazis, half a part had been taken over by the Japanese, sorry. And then there was a thin strip in the middle that was like the chaos zone that really had no government. Oh,
right. Okay.
And that all of this political stuff, all of these different forms of fascism and authoritarianism or resistance and all this kind of stuff, were really hiding the fact that the discovery had been made that we lived in a multidimensional reality, and that there were more, and that human beings possessed the ability to move between realms and worlds, and that all of the fighting was really about guarding the sort of portals, guarding the entrances and the exits, that each people had their own different techniques. And you live in a place, Bangladesh, that is very old, that has, is connected to, is part of a larger civilization in that area that has been around forever, that has certain practices when it comes to spirituality and metaphysics and diet, that we care for things that seem to imply that there is more than one world, and that the human being possesses the ability to move between them. And that has been the most colonized area of the world by the British and whatever. That what we're really being distracted from is the fact that we live in this completely open reality with endless ways to experience being human, right? And that some people can do things that others can't. Right. And that doesn't mean they're better. It just means that that's what their genetics are wired for. And then you have this one group, that is where the kakistocracy comes from, that seems to have a more limited range, right? But is willing to do things that the others aren't. And so they've gone around and set up shop in front of all of these, let's just call them portals. I'm using that facetious, like sort of the metaphor. And generated a system in those locations to have people paying attention to everything other than, hey, I'm a magical being who lives in a magical world, and there's lots of things to explore, right? And that it's really this much more like deep-seated spiritual demoralization that we have all living through.
Yeah, I get that. And I tell you, the moment that I had that, it wasn't even an understanding, but sort of an acknowledgement. Imagine what we could be. I was on the boat to Gaza. And the Israelis had shut down our GPS. And what they really wanted was for us to wander into Israeli territorial waters so that then they could justify picking us up. And when that didn't happen, that's when they maliciously rammed the boat. and, destroyed the boat. But there had been all kinds of like little provocations before that. And I surmised that they really wanted us to legitimately stray. So I asked the captain of the boat, how did you navigate without GPS? And you know what he said? It was the most sensible thing in the world. But, we have been so tethered to our devices that we can't imagine that there's another way of being and another way of knowing. He said, I did it the old-fashioned way. I looked at the stars. So then I began to just think, oh my gosh, what about ancient man trying to make sense of where we are on this planet, or on this planet as opposed to not being on another planet? And they were following all of the planets, and they had such an immense knowledge about, well, survival. And we couldn't survive today if my Bangladeshi kids, they know the difference between freshwater fishing, seawater fishing, saltwater fishing. They know how to survive. And our kids have never even seen a fish that they ate because, it's already filleted. So I come here and I'm trying to fillet, and they think, oh my God, this crazy woman trying to fillet and throw away half the fish. So this other way of living that you're talking about, I do believe that there are some people who have that knowledge. That knowledge was not lost to humanity, but that knowledge is locked away from humanity. And so, yeah, these are the things that we need to be contemplating, actually. And we're not, because you're right. That's a sideshow. And that sideshow has been created to distract us and to be a sideshow. And on every level, it's the nature of disease. So that's become a sideshow, right? Climate change, that's become a sideshow. You name it, and it's pretty much a sideshow. And in 2008, when I did the Green Party campaign across the US, that was really significant for me, because the people who were more in touch with that other side, who were more in touch with the real side, were the ones that didn't have televisions in their living rooms. So that taught me. So, I can't even imagine the last time I looked at television. There are some things, like I told you, I rented the Matrix, but I did that because I wanted to go back and actually study some messages that might be there. Like you're telling me about
watch
cave
that.
dick.
Watch The Man in the High Castle. There's also a really good German series. It's on Netflix and it's dubbed in English now, so you don't have to look at the subtitles. It's called Dark, right? And based on some things that I know, based on some positions you've been in your life, when you look at these things, I think it's going to open a door for you in your head about what maybe a lot of these arguments and funding and rules and things that you were participating in were really about, and what the true nature of our reality is. And I would love to have a conversation with you about these things after you'd watch that, because I think that these political movements we have lived through, fascism, freedom, communism, socialism, these were all, in my opinion, these were all local styles that were developed to deal with the same problem, and that is that we live in an open system, which kind of puts to bed the idea that you can control people. So if you can't control people, but you can get them to argue about what kind of control we have, they're arguing about a false problem.
Yeah,
right.
That's
and
right.
So I would love to chat with you about this if we can do this again sometime after that.
Yeah, let's do this again. And
Okay.
When I have the time, I will signal to you that I'm done with The Man in the Castle and Dark. I will look at them both. Yeah. Because this really is where I am now in terms of like I think maybe probably the last time we talked, I said I wake up every morning and I figure out how can I resist today.
Yep.
And we need more of that. But then there's also another body of knowledge out there that we need to have so that we can understand how to resist.
I think it's resist the urge to engage in the system that they have created to contain us.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Danny, I'm going to give you the last word.
I am resisting the urge to ask a million more questions because I know we're half an hour over the time you've so generously given us. I just want to thank you so much for your voice, your courage, your work in the world, for being here at the same time. We are so grateful for you on this planet, Cynthia.
Well, thank you so much. And I this has been really good for me because I've learned something. And I know that there are people who have contemplated where we are now, and they've contemplated solutions. Otherwise, you give up hope, and that's a terrible place to be. Right now, I'm in a place where students are committing suicide because they're giving up hope, and we cannot have that. We can't allow people to kill themselves because they've given up hope. So I am looking for answers, and I want to share those answers with students who are also looking as well. So thank you. I'm going to look up these two series, The Dark and The Man in the High Castle, and we will get back together and let's talk about some solutions.
All right. So
awesome. Yeah.
Let people know, I think you have a new Patreon. Let people know where they can find your work, how they can follow the contemplations of Cynthia McKinney.
Yeah, and the struggles of just getting older and dealing with that and trying to age gracefully and remain sort of engaged in this world. And relevant to our aspirations for deep and meaningful change. So I can be found on Patreon, it's true. And I don't do nearly enough on Patreon as I should. And I've been asked to do a radio show. And I just, to be honest, I'll tell you that I haven't produced a single episode on the radio show. And that's because I said, I've been saying the same thing for 30 years and I just I'm talked out. I don't have anything else to say. But I still made a commitment that I have to live up to. So I said, okay, well, maybe we'll do music instead. So, just do something that's still along the revolutionary path. And so maybe by the time we meet again, I'll have the radio show where I can give you the call numbers for that. And I have my All Things Cynthia McKinney Contact Us page where I love to hear from people. And I'm hearing from people. I'm on Twitter for now. I've been X'd out of Facebook. So, I can't even go on Facebook to show my students something. It's really that bad. So Facebook is out, but Twitter I'm on, and then I'm on the other stuff, the what is it? Shucks. Truth Social, Gab, all the other stuff.
All the Nazi platforms.
Yeah, but you know what? And those are silos.
Yep.
Those are silos. So I'm in the silos, but I try to go to all of the silos instead of just being siloed in one silo.
Right.
But I look forward to hearing from people so that I can understand where people are, because that'll help me. And this engagement with you guys has helped me to know where I need to be and pointing me to some solutions that I can share with other people. So I say thank you very much.
Awesome. All right, Cynthia, we'll do it again shortly. Thank you so much for your time. Danny and I are going to hang out and do a little show wrap up.
Okay.
We will see you soon, and I will link you up with everything when we're ready to put this out. Have a wonderful evening, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good morning to you guys, and bye-bye to me.
Good night, Cynthia. Take care. And there she goes. And I'm going to go to the bathroom. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll do part 2.
Sounds good.